PCBs, or printed circuit boards, have always fascinated me. Nowadays I design them, but they've been in my life ever since I was a little kid taking things apart. Now when you look at a complex PCB like this PC motherboard, you can't help but compare it to a city. You got a city hall right there, little power plant, let's call that a coliseum, why not? And all of these little lines on the board, called traces, act like a sort of transit system connecting everything together and allowing all of the chips on the board to talk to one another. PCBs are in literally every modern electronic device. They're what let us take what used to take up an entire room and pack it down into something that fits in our pockets. So today, we're in a state-of-the-art PCB assembly facility, and we're gonna show you how they assemble up to 100,000 of these boards for companies like Samsung, Xiaomi, and Oppo every single day. So have I piqued your curiosity? That's enough intro. Let's get down to business. For our first stop, we're here in the factory's component receiving and processing area. So modern components come on big reels, some like these ones. These are particularly big, and they arrive on pallets like this. From there, they go over to these stations where they're scanned, labeled with the factory's own labels, and entered into the company's database system. Now, how do we keep track of this many components? And boy, there are a lot of them here, more than I've actually ever seen in person at once. So the inventory management system at this factory actually blows my mind. I've actually been to a few PCBA factories before. This one is far and away the most sophisticated. Let's go see this inventory management system in action because it's just so cool. So what she's doing over here is scanning the codes on the reels, and this smart cart is lighting up the slot that that component should go into, and then she's scanning that to confirm the slot that it's gone into, right? So what we're ending up with is a properly ordered set of components that can then be loaded into the feeders that are going to go into the PCB assembly machines that we'll see later. So I'm here at a specially restricted room where they keep chips that are more sensitive, and there are only 5 people in the factory who can actually get into this room. Now, I have some questions about that and some other things in the facility, and so I went and got a manager so that we could ask her. So I was wondering, this room, what makes these components so sensitive?
这个是我们的温私密元件，所以它的管控标准会非常精密，有控制要求的，温度、湿度，还有无尘。
My second question is, how many different component SKUs do you have?
3000多种。
3,000. That's a lot of parts. Okay, this might be my favorite part of the whole place, and these are feeder banks for the pick and place machines. Just to explain how they work a little bit, each of these component reels is getting fed up into this feeder right here, right? And then coming out over here. And there's tape, which you can see is getting peeled back right here. And this is actually a critical part of the feeding process, is when, so that you can see these little gear teeth here, that advances the reel. And then this peels back the cover tape, making the component accessible to the pick and place machine's suction head. Now, all of that is happening in this next room. But really, look at all of these. of this factory's 16 advanced PCB assembly lines. Each of these lines can do 9,000 boards per day, which explains why the factory has such a high overall output capacity. Now, I'm being joined here by my friend, Engineer Ye. Nice to meet you. I'm Gaussian Engineer. And he's going to be helping us along the way for any questions that we have. The first step here, right? Actually, there's a stack of PCBs, basically straight from the PCB factory. And what this machine is doing is just taking them off the top of that stack. So it's going to use some suction nozzles to pick up the next PCB. And its first step along the way is to get a unique marking. So it's going into this laser engraving machine, which is going to mark it with a serial number in the form of a QR code, right? Which is going to let the board be tracked all the way down the line and through the quality control process and so forth. So this stage over here, just inside, that board that we just saw on the conveyor belt is getting carried over there. So it's at the back side of this machine, right? So we need to wait a moment because this robot is actually handling both sides. Okay, so now it picks that board up, it checks it, and it's now put it into that metal thread. And this carrier here is going to go grab it, bring it over here, and send that. So that's sort of our first stage of this process. So the next step in our journey is going to be the application of solder paste, which is sort of a gel liquid form of solder. And solder is what bonds the components to the surface of the board. So before the board goes into that solder paste machine, we have a cleaning step right here, and that's just cleaning the dust off of the surface of the board. And then from there, we're going into this beautiful solder paste stenciling machine, automatic solder paste stenciling machine. Engineer, yes? Thank you. Now, what's happening here is that there's a nozzle that's dispensing that gel solder paste, which is actually millions of tiny little metallic balls suspended in what's called a flux gel. And the PCB from earlier is coming in, getting pressed up against the bottom of a stencil, just like a paint stencil, right? And then this squeegee, right, is pulling the paste across the stencil and leaving it on the surface of the board. The board then drops down and it moves on to the next step. And this is actually a self-cleaning machine, which is just incredibly cool because this is a potentially messy process, and this thing just does it perfectly from start to finish. Now, I'm curious though, actually, how do you ensure that it is perfect? How do you inspect that? Because when I do it, I have to do it by eye.
这个就是我们正常的一些参数，但是这个没有吸高的，它就会再显示一个0。这个是不良的参数，然后这个是我们设定的参数。
That's very cool. We're moving on to the next, and I think mine and probably everybody's favorite step. So now what we have is our PCB with solder paste on each of the little pads, the little metal pads that the parts are going to go onto. Now we actually have to put the parts on there. So we're moving on to some of my favorite machines. These are the reels of components from the inventory management that we saw earlier. And these are the feeders. So you can see how fast that head is moving. It has 20 nozzles that is passing over the ends of these component reels, picking up 20 different components and then placing them onto the board. So right here it's picking, now it's placing. Picking, placing. That's genuine. I am in awe. How many components are on each of the boards that we're seeing assembled right now? That's 906 components just on this one side of the board. Because there are so many delicate parts being added to these boards so quickly, how does the post-assembly process, post-pick and place process work?
后的话，我们这个会查一些、检测一些少见的偏位的，然后的话，这里就是一个我们显示出来的一个图片。如果说我们人工看到没有任何问题，复判的话没有问题，我们就把它这样子放下去。然后的话，如果有不良要查询的话，这里的话是有记录的，然后是这个文件夹，这里面所有的不良以及好的都会有一些记录在里面。然后的话会记录到这边，然后这边是会有人工进行修复的。
So after all of that is verified, and we know that the boards have the components in the right places, we're going to move along to the reflow step, where the boards are going to go through a giant oven, basically, that will melt that solder paste and basically weld the components to the board. So let's move along to that. I actually missed one step along the way, which is a pretty interesting one. One set of components, these are particularly wide feeders, and these parts that are going on there are what are called cans, and that's radio frequency shielding to keep stray RF emissions, radio emissions, from interfering with other devices. So these are little enclosures that go over sections of the board to isolate them from each other. Once this last pick and place step is done, you can see here the board is going to come out here, and we'll see all the components on it. And so this machine is also very cool. This is like a multi-zone giant version of the toaster oven that you find in like a hotel continental breakfast or a buffet, right? You've got that conveyor belt and some heating elements in there. This just happens to be about 1 million times more sophisticated, but that's a good way to visualize it. So there are 12 different zones down this conveyor belt so that the temperature of the board is gradually heating up. So we can see that as it passes through those zones, it's eventually going to peak at, it looks like about 245 degrees Celsius, and stay there for just a little while at a plateau, and then cool off, right? And what that curve looks like depends on what kind of components you're using and what their heat tolerances are, how long they can stay at a high temperature, and also the characteristics of the particular solder paste that's being used. So all of these, since they're consumer products, are going to have ROHS certified solder paste. That means lead-free, right? And lead-free solder paste has a different reflow curve, a different temperature curve than leaded paste, right? Than paste with lead in it, which isn't legal to use in consumer products. This final automated optical inspection step is being done on a more sophisticated machine, a 3D inspection machine, right? That's taking pictures from different angles to capture the height of all of the components on the board and to be able to capture detail that can't be captured by the top-down 2D imagery that the other machines were using. So once that step is done, we actually get to an interesting point, which is that we've only done one side of the board, and we mentioned at the beginning that there are two sides to the board. And this is where that separation happens. The two conveyors in here, and actually let's look at this other side here at the adjacent line. On this side, right, the boards are getting loaded into these carriers, and that carrier is going to go all the way back to the beginning of the line to do the other side. Huh? On the other side of the line, and we've got one of these here too, we have a CNC milling machine. And what that's doing is cutting our panel of 4 boards into separate PCBs, ready for human inspection, at which point we're going to move on to the testing phase. So let's just have a look at our final inspection step here. And the boards are being separated into those trays, and then we're going to move on to testing. Now that our boards are finished, we're moving on to the testing phase. Now, I've seen PCBA lines before, albeit not as sophisticated as those. I have not seen this before, and it is very, very cool. This is the coolest testing system I've ever seen. So, it's in multiple stages. First, the boards are being put onto this sled here, which is going to take them down into the memory flashing area. So you see this sled on the track. This pneumatic arm is loading up 2 units, and it's being sent down. Now we have another robotic arm here with a fully custom set of tool heads that's taking those boards and placing them into a set of actually redundant flashing stations. So it's placing those 2 units into a tray that then gets pulled into here, and a set of pogo pins come down and make contact with the test points on the board and flash the memory. It then moves on to the next of 3 stations, and down here it's tuning the frequencies of the different components. Since this is a phone, right, there are a number of oscillators in there, different clocks. Once all of that flashing and testing and tuning is done in these very cool machines, we have a set of test jigs here where basically the integration of that board with all of the phone's peripherals will take place. So here, workers will test whether the connections for cameras and touch screens and so forth work with a manual inspection, at which point, after each board has passed, they will go into a tray like this and on for assembly into a final consumer electronics product. Well, it's been a long day. We are up 1 floor above that PCBA floor, the PCB assembly floor. Unfortunately, because of the NDAs between the clients and the factory, we can't actually show you the finished assembled products, but they're from brand names that you know. And so this is the floor where they do that final assembly and testing. Given how impressive the PCBA operation downstairs is, I think you can trust me when I say this is a pretty impressive setup up here too. I wish we could show it to you during working hours. Unfortunately, we can't. If you have enjoyed this video tour of this PCB assembly factory, which actually does so much more as well, please like and subscribe. And also, leave in the comments section below suggestions for the next kind of factory we should visit. Here at Machina in Shenzhen, we're always looking for the next factory to visit and share with you. So let us know. Thanks so much for spending your time with us, and stay curious.